Robin, how are you?
I'm good, Marcus. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thank you, as I am most days.
Yeah, wonderful.
There we go. So, welcome everyone. This is another series of podcasts and vlogs by the Mindset Revolution. This morning I'm delighted to have with me Robin Knowles, who's got a fascinating story, which I'm sure you're going to enjoy. So if we can begin, Robin, by just you introducing yourself, telling people who you are, maybe a bit about what you do, and then we'll get into your story.
Yeah, wonderful. So my name's Robin Knowles. I'm 33 years old, born and raised in London. I currently work for a firm called CJS Risk Management as the operations manager. We are a commercial insurance brokerage selling insurance packages to businesses across the UK.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah.
So Robin and I were kind of introduced through a colleague, and we were talking about various work projects together. And in the midst of all that, he just slipped a little thing in there, which I went, wow. So, as you know, if you've watched any of these before, we're primarily concerned with mindset, I guess, and how people have overcome challenges, maybe overcome adversity, and what they do to kind of make their day, life, everything better. And Robin's got an interesting story to tell, so I'll let you begin wherever you feel most appropriate.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the best place to start would probably be around about 2007, 2008. So that was when I essentially started my career in insurance as a private medical insurance broker. So I was working for a small firm in Battersea area, where I'm from, and I was working there for about 2 years, became relatively successful, was earning a decent wage, and then over the course of a weekend, I started getting quite sick and feeling very unwell. And then one morning on a Monday, I've gone into work and was feeling really unwell that morning, told a few people at work. And then while I was in my office alone, I collapsed and had a seizure. So ambulance came, picked me up, got rushed to the hospital. I spent about 12 hours in the emergency department while they were running various different tests on me. Giving me multiple painkillers because I was in horrendous pain at the time as well. Weren't quite sure what was going on, so I got admitted into hospital. And from that point on, I spent the next 10 to 11 months in hospital. Wow. Whilst the doctors were performing various investigations and diagnosing what was wrong with me. So over the course of those 11 months while I was in hospital, it started with pain in my feet that slowly started creeping up my legs to my waist, and then after I was in horrendous pain, I was on morphine for about 3 months on a regular basis. They were coming around injecting me with morphine, and as the pain started to wear away, so did the sensation in my legs. So at the end of my near year stint in hospital, I was physically paralysed from the waist down, and was completely unable to move my legs of my own accord. At that point, the doctors had explained to me what happened. So I was diagnosed with a condition called conversion disorder.
Sorry, say that again?
Conversion disorder.
Conversion disorder.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the way it was described to me is there's a condition called phantom limb disorder, which is a condition where amputees still have the sensation that their arm is still there. So if they've lost an arm, they've got an itch that they can never scratch. So my condition is essentially the opposite of that, where you still have your limbs, but your brain just decides to forget that they're there, basically. It's not particularly common condition, particularly among men. It affects women more than it does men, but it's a very bizarre condition, mainly because it's a psychosomatic disorder, so the symptoms from it can present differently in anybody. Other cases while I was there was in a specialist department that was dealing with it, and there were 3 other people that had the same disorder as I, and their conditions ranged from unable to move their neck, so paralysis in the neck, unable to speak, blindness. For me, the main condition that I experienced was mainly the paralysis from the waist down, and I'd say on a regular basis anywhere between a week and 2 weeks, was constantly having seizures, where I would completely black out and was unresponsive. So that was the condition that I was diagnosed with, and the doctors essentially told me I was never going to walk again. Yeah.
Can I just ask, and there was no real signs about this? It just kind of woke up one day?
Completely out of the blue.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, as far as I was concerned, I was in perfectly good health. I mean, I was very young at the time, so I would have been 19, 20, 21, around that age. So, you know, for me at that point in my life, you know, I was invincible. You know, as most young people think they are. And yeah, it really came out of the blue. You know, I wasn't really, I didn't feel unwell up until that weekend. You know, I was perfectly fine, no colds, or I wasn't very much a sickly person back in those days either.
right.
So then, you know, to spend a year in hospital and to be told by the doctors that you're not going to walk again, really sort of takes a pause in your life. And,
Just a bit,
yeah,
eh?
yeah, exactly. So at that point, there was nothing more the hospital could do for me, so I was discharged from hospital and sent home. So at that,
You're in a wheelchair at this point.
well, that's part of the story. So I was discharged from the hospital and went to live at my family home where I was raised. So I was staying in my bedroom at that point, which was on the first floor of our 2-floor terrace house in Battersea. And because I was in my bedroom, which was upstairs, I didn't really leave the house. So I didn't have a wheelchair for about the first 2.5, 3 years, because those first 3 years I essentially sat in my bedroom.
Wow, I didn't realise it was that long.
Yeah. It was. I mean, there's no point in lying about it. I mean, when you sit in the same room for any extended period of time, things start going a bit funny. You know, in your mind, and you know, it's unavoidable because you're in such a tiny space. I mean, my bedroom was probably no bigger than this room.
Okay.
So when you're confined to that sort of space for a long period of time, you know, it's going to pretty much send anyone crazy. And
I bet, I can only imagine.
I mean, I don't care how well adjusted you think you are. You know, it will affect you in some way, shape, or form. So at that point, me and my sister applied to the council to procure an adapted property that would be suitable for a wheelchair user. Amazingly, Wandsworth Council pulled through and arranged a flat for myself and my sister to stay in. It was a 2-bedroom flat in Battersea as well, and it was all ground level, ramp access, so it was fully accessible to my wheelchair. At which point, obviously, I had a wheelchair at my family home, but it wasn't one that I could use all the time because obviously, given the situation that I was living upstairs in my bedroom, I couldn't exactly sit in my wheelchair the whole time. So once we made the move to a new property that could facilitate wheelchair access, the NHS did a custom build wheelchair for me, designed to my measurements, and it's mainly designed to give you comfort in your day-to-day activities as well, because sitting in a wheelchair is not particularly comfortable. I mean, you know, the idea of sitting down all day is great for some people, but it loses its novelty after all. Yeah, absolutely. I finally got the wheelchair off the NHS, and for the next sort of 3.5 years, I was somewhat autonomous in my day-to-day life. However, there are quite a lot of restrictions even when you do have a wheelchair in the sort of activities that you can do. So for probably the next 2 years, I pretty much stayed at home, didn't work, didn't really do much, didn't really go out that much. I mean, I wouldn't say a side effect, but an offshoot of being disabled and being in a wheelchair is it makes you feel very awkward, especially in today's society as well. So I very much became quite a withdrawn person. I developed agoraphobia as well, so the moment I would go outside I would start feeling ill and nauseous and want to be sick, so I very rarely left the house. I had to go through various different psychological treatments where I had to speak with counsellors and therapists. I was on antidepressants for a while, and I'm not a big fan of antidepressants. I mean, when I was on antidepressants, I was on them for about 6 months, and I pretty much felt like a zombie the entire time. And it's a horrible feeling. So I eventually came off those of my own free will because I just didn't feel happy on them. And that's that sort of led me down a dark path, shall we say. There were some dark years in that time. Yeah. And I think the main issue with it was the fact that there was essentially there was no hope for me. You know, I resigned myself to the fact that this is my life now. So that did one of two things. Firstly, it made me accept the position that I was in, and then it sort of shook me into the state of mind of, well, no one's going to fix this for me, so I'm going to have to adapt and build upon the situation that I have to make my life better. So I decided to sort of pull myself together a little bit and ended up going back to college, studied maths. Then that was great for a while, but I felt like I wanted to get a bit more involved in the world. So I decided to go out and get a job. And so the first job I got was working for a firm called Listen that was doing telephone charity fundraising.
I know, listen, I've worked for them myself.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
oh,
that's a whole conversation for another day.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah.
There we go.
So I worked for Listen for, I think it was about a year and a half.
Okay.
And while I was working there, an amazing opportunity came their way, obviously, which I've told you about, and now I'll mention here. So while I was working at Listen, still in the wheelchair, I got approached by one of my doctors who had informed me that an opportunity had arisen to take part in an experimental medical trial here in the UK that had come over from America. So it was a treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation.
Okay.
Yeah, a bit of a mouthful.
Sounds interesting.
So the doctors essentially explained it to me as it's firing electromagnetic pulses through your brain and central nervous system in an attempt to somewhat reboot your brain as you would a computer.
Yeah.
It's the old turn off and on again, basically. So they mentioned, obviously, they'd been trialing it in America and had seen some good results, and they wanted to trial it over here. So I agreed to take part in the trial. There were 14 of us originally in the trial. And so I went for 4 sessions. So the first 3 sessions, I went down into the room, got sat on a sort of somewhat upright table, had this giant sort of tray strapped to my head, and then they would just, it was quite a loud sort of crackly noise and fire, and it would feel like a jolt going through your body. The first 3 sessions, there was absolutely no change to my condition whatsoever. Then on the 4th attempt, after they fired the last pulse through my brain, I felt my toes just starting to twitch.
Incredible.
Like that. And I mean, of course, for me, that was like, it's absolute shock, because I was told I was never going to walk again. So the moment I could feel a slight twitch in my toes was very overwhelming. And then they sent me home, and over the course of about 3 to 5 days, I'd say, I started to get more and more sensation, mainly in my feet more than anything else. But slowly started to come back, and for me, that was a sign of hope. So from that point, I had to spend the next 10 months in physiotherapy to essentially learn how to walk again. Okay. Because at that point, I'd spent, I think it was over 6 years, just about over 6 years in a wheelchair, and I had severe muscle degradation, and my legs were incredibly skinny at that point, just from obviously not using them. So the next 10 months were spent doing various different exercises to try and build up the muscle tone back in the legs, and then I had to go into like these various different frames to help you assist walking. So it went from various different stages to like a fully secured frame, then onto a Zimmer frame, then onto crutches, then onto walking sticks, then onto one walking stick, and then eventually with my own free will. And that took about 10 months, but roughly about over the course of 10 months. And and I suppose here I am today.
There you are.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I met you, I wouldn't have had a glimmer.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have any idea at all that I used to be in a wheelchair.
So, I mean, just a fascinating story, and how, what were the biggest challenges you faced, maybe from a kind of a motivation mindset point of view, and I'm interested also what, if anything, you employed just to get, because there must have taken guts, determination to get through that. So what was going through your mind?
Well, this is the thing, like when you're faced with that sort of situation, and I mean, if anyone else is listening that's in a similar situation to I was, you get a lot of people say to you, be brave and muster up the courage. It's all rubbish, really, if I'm honest. I mean, you can say that to your heart's content to someone who's suffering an illness. To the person that's suffering that illness, I would say to them, it gets harder. It just gets harder, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Okay.
That's life. The trick is how you deal with it. There's two ways you can deal with it. You can accept it and live with it, or you can say, I'm not having that, and you march on. The biggest lesson that I learned from it was, doesn't matter how bad you think your life is, there's always someone far worse than you. I mean, I was in a wheelchair for over 6 years. I had to have carers come and assist me with my washing and bathing and cooking. That's an easy life compared to, say, a child in Africa that has to walk 20 miles to get a glass of water. That's an easy life. Having to walk 20 miles, that's a difficult life. I don't know if I have the strength to do that.
It's interesting you say that. I've talked to people, and I think it's part of it is that it's very relative to us. I mean, that is most of us probably watching or listening to this cannot conceive of having to walk 20 miles to do something that we turn around and just turn on a tap. But then again, having to go through what you've gone through, I think even more people can't conceive of that, to have our daily physicality just taken away from us overnight, and then have the determination to battle through. I think is phenomenal.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There were very dark days, and I mean, if I'm being completely honest, there were even days where I considered contemplating suicide. I suppose it's a natural byproduct of the situation you're in. When you're forced into a situation where you see no way out and no hope, and the darkness is surrounding you. There are those cold, dark, lonely nights where you think maybe the world is just better off without me.
Yeah.
It's part and parcel. I mean, anybody going through anything like that will have that thought at one point in their life.
And was there anything you did? I mean, there was light at the end of the tunnel for you. You are 100% okay. Which is incredible. And I'm interested as well how you now kind of carry the determination, the positivity, the I'm not accepting this through into everyday life now, because I know it would be interesting to a lot of people.
See, the thing for me that I realised with it, and it's something that a lot of us do in our day-to-day lives nowadays, is we take really small things for granted, but when you can't do them, you really miss them. For me, it sounds very bizarre, but I mean, if there is anyone watching that is in a wheelchair, I'm sure they can relate, is the one thing that I missed the most during the time that I was ill was making my own coffee.
Okay.
It seems really small and trivial, But when you have to rely on someone else to do these things for you, it takes away so much of your independence. It doesn't make you an individual. It makes you someone who has to be cared for. It makes you a vulnerable person, and nobody wants to be a vulnerable person. And I suppose for me, that was one of the things that I didn't like about it, was that it made me vulnerable and it made me have to rely on people, and that made me want to change that. I didn't want to be in that situation. I wanted my independence.
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty much the journey that everyone goes through in their life as a child, is their journey to independence. And to have your independence taken away from you is a hard thing to have to deal with. But there are ways to deal with it. For me, as I said, obviously one of the biggest things was, I always try to keep in mind that however hard I have it, there are people that have it harder than I. And I do have opportunities, even in a wheelchair, that other people don't have. There were both great things and bad things about living in London. As an example, buses are free to travel on if you're in a wheelchair.
Okay.
And they're relatively easy to get onto. Now, I wouldn't have known any of that unless I was in a wheelchair. Granted, it doesn't benefit me now at all in any way to know that, but if I have a friend that ends up in the same situation that I'm in, I can pass that information on. And I suppose going back to the whole mindset of it, as long as you accept that you're going to have dark days, there's no reason you can't get over it. Out of the entire, let's say, 6 years that I was sick, I'd say probably less than 0.001% of that were really dark days. When you look at that in the greater scheme of things, you have bad days out of the 6 years. Let's say you have 12 of those really dark days out of the 6 years. In terms of ratios, that's still an okay ratio. Everyone has the right to have bad days.
I'm sure, and I'm interested in those times of, was it your own inner determination? Was it stuff you learned, stuff you read? I think it'd be helpful for other people to. I talk about business times and general life terms.
Yeah.
There are ways you can overcome. I don't feel qualified to talk about how you would deal with those situations. So if you were to share things that people who might be experiencing that could maybe do, latch onto, think about doing.
Well, there's it's all down really to the individual. For me, something that really helped me during those times, and it's a bit bizarre. I'm a 33-year-old man, and I'm sure people out there may not relate to it, but video games.
Why not?
I found them a great source of comfort, inspiration, escapism. Especially in the first 3 years when I was essentially trapped in my bedroom. I spent the majority of those 3 years playing various different video games, and for me, I couldn't go out and do the things that I was doing in the video games. So for me, it allowed me the opportunity to forget my troubles and live my life vicariously through a character that I had some connection to. For me, particularly, it was role-playing games where you make your own character, and I don't know, you can be the hero that saves the galaxy or whatever like that. But it allows you for that short period of time to be someone other than the person you were at that point. Now, it's great, it does help, but obviously you have to come back to reality. You can't spend your entire life in a virtual world. But you can use what you learn in that virtual world to help you get through the real world.
Okay.
Because you are going to face scenarios, you're going to face persecution, you're going to face ignorance. That's the biggest one for me. If you're in a wheelchair and you're out on the street, people are going to walk into you, people are going to get in your way, because I'm not saying that everyone's ignorant, but there is a lot of ignorance in the world, but it's not malicious ignorance. It's just the way of society today. You know, I mean, even now walking about, coming into work, you know, there are people that stand at the top of staircases on their phones and things like that. You know, people are just oblivious to the world around them these days.
Sure, yeah.
So the one thing that I would say to anyone in that sort of situation that I was in is the key to it all is patience. And that was the biggest thing that I learned during that time in the wheelchair, is to learn to be patient. Things are going to be slower, things are going to be harder, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with people and deal with everyday life and scenarios. Patience will help with that. It's an easy thing to say, it's a difficult thing to do and learn, but it's one of those things. I mean, especially if you're in the situation that I was in, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to suddenly wake up one day with the patience of a saint. It takes time, and as I said before, you know, you're going to have your dark days, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to get angry with everyone, even your family. That will pass. You know, it's one of those things. You have the right to be angry if you're in that situation. You know, you have the right to be upset with the world. I mean, you know, it was an awful situation for anyone to have to. I mean, but it will humble you as a person. And now it's very much changed my perspective on the world and you know, how I interact with people on a daily basis as well. Like, there were certain things that I would have done before I was in the wheelchair that I wouldn't do now. Like an example being that before I was in the wheelchair, if I saw someone in a wheelchair on the street, and let's say they were trying to get up a ramp into a building or something, I would have gone up behind them and helped to push them up the ramp. But the thing I learned being in a wheelchair is I didn't like people doing that to me, because you're forcibly taking my independence when I haven't asked you to do it. Yeah. If I'm asking you for help, that's great, you know. Okay. So now for me, if I'm out and about and I was to see someone in a wheelchair going up a ramp, unless they specifically ask me to help them, I will leave them to it, because they're still a person.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it's interesting, because sometimes trying to do the right thing, accidentally doing the wrong thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. So that brings us neatly on, actually, to today, to how you maybe carry some of the things you've learnt in. So you're a successful CEO, manager,
operations,
yeah. Senior operations of a busy city centre risk management company and insurance brokerage, which will be fraught with all sorts of everyday challenges and what have you. So using is the stuff that you learned during those challenging times that you apply to your kind of everyday business processes and how you kind of get through the day. So share a bit of that with us.
Yeah. So I mean, I suppose this relates into what I was just saying before, is patience. I mean, particularly now, I mean, we've had a few new people come on board. They're all particularly young guys as well. And the thing that I find with a lot of young people today, and I'm talking people 20 and below, is nobody's got a lot of patience in the world anymore. It's a very much an instant gratification society that we live in these days. Now, that said, it does have its benefits. But more often than not, it's more negative than positive, and this is what I try and instill, or help instill, in everyone that I work with, is to be patient. And you know, life is hard. Living in London is hard. Working is hard. I mean, look, let's face it, nobody wants to work, right? If we all had our own way, everyone would just be sat at home doing nothing. Right? Okay. But we can't do that. Nobody can do that, unless you're like really super rich, of course. But things will come at you during the day that will annoy you and will irritate you and irk you. I mean, there have been some days where I've sat in my office and I'm swearing at my computer.
Yeah.
You know,
we've all been there.
Exactly. It happens. You just got to deal with it. It's patience. It's that will to keep going.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have days in your everyday life where Yeah, I mean, I've had it at CJS where I've come in at 8:30 and I've not left till like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, because you just get stuff thrown at you left, right and centre. Patience and perseverance.
I think you're right, and it's one of the things I probably have to teach more in the city than anything else is how to deal with stress. You know, the stresses and strains, and because there's this whole focus on instant gratification, which is, I don't think it's that age dependent anymore. It seems to be across the board, because we've got all these devices and things which is all about responding now, getting information now, which means we don't have time for ourselves. And it's one of the reasons, because that's how I got into coaching, was by being stressed. Because I'm not sure if we had the conversation, but people who watch these may know. And so, you know, I teach a thing called the calm mindset, which is all about just trying to bring some balance and not be maybe as sucked into this instant gratification and instantly being available 24/7, because it's not realistic. It actually is counterintuitive. So I'm loving the whole patience vibe. What's the phrase? Patience is a virtue needed by many and possessed by few, or could be a misquote, but something like that. So that's really fascinating. So if you were to give some final tips on, you know, it's been fascinating hearing your story. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's nice. It's just great. I mean, I love hearing about people who've overcome adversity, and something as challenging as that is incredible. But yeah, if you were to give just some general pieces of advice to people, we've got, you know, patience, we've got persistence, I think you said as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, it never hurts to be kind to your neighbour, right? I think, especially nowadays with a lot of things that's going on in the world, you know, there's a lot of pent up aggression in people these days. And maybe because of the society that we live in, maybe because of the times, who knows. But ultimately, if you want kindness done to you, you have to give it to other people as well. It's that age-old expression, right? Do unto others.
Yeah, absolutely.
It never hurts to be kind. You know, manners don't cost anything, and it never hurts anyone. Help out someone if you can. You know. I'm not saying, as I said in the example earlier, don't go and just assume someone needs help. Don't ask if they need help. You know, if you see someone struggling with their shopping, ask if they need a hand.
Don't just dive in.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's things like that, because ultimately I think that makes the world a better place. It may sound cliched, may sound corny, but I believe it, and I try to live my life vicariously through that now.
And what's not to love about that?
Yeah.
Well, that has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you for taking time out today to talk to me, and hopefully a few people watching. I guess I should say this, that we'll probably go on our channel, and you're probably supposed to subscribe or something, but it'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts are as well. So thank you so much again, Robin, for taking the time out. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you much.
You take it easy.
Cheers. Thank you.